These scholars were all practicing applied science. Jabir ibn Hayyan is the one who made chemistry a science. He described many of the chemical processes we still use till today. Al-Zahrawi showed us how to do surgeries for different types of sicknesses and invented many of the tools we still use till today in surgery. Al-Jazari also invented several water-based autonomous machines. That's why he was described as the father of mechanical engineering. All these people, all these scientists used to believe in God, used to acknowledge him, and to think of their scientific research as something that brings them closer to him. However, nowadays, the situation actually is quite different. It became inappropriate to talk about God when you are doing science. So, and many of the professors, especially in the Western universities, are atheists. So how did that big change happen? That's what we are going to see in that episode of the story of secularizing science. We'll tell you about the important milestones of how this dramatic change happened. So it started with the church adopting the Aristotelian teaching and opposing the scientists who came up in the period of Renaissance. So we'll give you just two examples about that. Like Copernicus came up with the sun-centered system, and he wrote a book on that on 1514, but he published this book almost after 30 years. And people think the reason behind that delay is that he was very apprehensive about the negative reaction of the church. And yes, that was confirmed by the fact that in 1551, the Pope declared that people should not just follow reason. They should confirm their opinions with the Holy Scripture. If he stopped here, things would have been okay. But he added to that, they should also confirm their opinion with the traditions of the apostles and the sacred and approved councils. And that's where the Aristotelian teaching is included. Then Galileo came later, and he was a strong supporter of Copernicus. And he faced the same problem. He faced the same problem exactly. Also in 1660, the head of the Catholic Church banned the teaching of the sun-centered system, which is basically the Copernicus system. So when Galileo published his book, The Dialogue of the Two Chief Systems of the World, in 1632, the church acted very swiftly against him, and they asked him to come to stand before them in 1632. He tried to gain some time, but he couldn't. So in 1633, the church forced him to retract his support of the sun-centered system theory. But that repentance was not enough. They also put him or sentenced him to a house arrest for the rest of his life. And yes, he died on this house arrest. And then in 1992, long time after that, the Pope also announced that the Inquisition of Galileo was wrong, and we should not take the text of the Bible literally, basically giving some room for the scientific theory to qualify or to interpret what the Bible meant. But as you notice, this took about 350 years to happen. A bit slow, I guess you have to agree with me. So people got the understanding, if you want to advance and if you want to follow science, and of course science rendered Europe big service in terms of advancing their economic condition and in terms of initiating the Industrial Revolution, you have to get the church out of the way. And that's basically what they did. Once secularism became the adopted system of the state, they declared the principle of separating the church from the state. So that was the first step of starting the animosity or starting this battle between science and religion. Then after that, Auguste Comte, who was a French philosopher, came up with the philosophy of positivism. I'm not sure about why this word was used. It seems like a nice word to give some positive impression. But the important thing about Comte is he said the only valid knowledge we gain is the one we gain through the scientific method. Like, okay, so what is the scientific method? He said the scientific method is a combination of observation and experimentation. So as you can see, only observation and experimentation, the role of deduction, reasoning, all this rationalism type of thinking is diminished or not mentioned clearly. The focus in the scientific investigation on recording physical phenomena as they go. And Comte also, many people think of him as the father of sociology because he is the first one who used the term sociology. And he said humanity goes through 3 stages. In the first stage, which he called it theological or fictitious, he said many of the natural phenomena around us are unknown. We don't know how they work, we don't know their reason. So whenever we don't know something, we said God did it. So this is the stage of theological where religion is used to fill the gaps of our ignorance. And then after that, he said metaphysics came, where religion and science coexist together. And this more or less represents the years of the Renaissance, where religion existed to some extent, but also science started to grow and started to give some explanation of the world. And then he said, when humanity matures in terms of thinking, then they will reach the 3rd stage, which is the stage of positive. And he called this is the scientific stage, where religion became minimal, almost out of the scene, and the science became the dominant factor in explaining things. So before we proceed, I want you to realize that positivism is by itself a religious tenet, actually very strong religious ideology. Who said that? Comte himself, by the way, not me. Comte actually self-published a book in 1852, and he called that book The Summary Exposition of the Universal Religion. And this universal religion, Comte called for, exists till today. And actually they have followers and they have churches all around the world, and with more number in Brazil. So when we look at positivism, it left many questions unanswered. I will just mention to you some of them. Comte speaks of science as if science became fully mature and it can explain everything, which is actually not the case at all. In the beginning of the 20th century, physics seems to have saturated and almost everything became clear. And when that happened, quantum physics came. And it caused a lot of disruption into the classical physics. And we started questioning many of the notions we think that classical physics introduced. And the science still today is still face fundamental and a huge challenge. So actually, science is not capable of explaining everything. Just to give a very simple example, till today, we don't even know exactly what the nature of light is. Light is not, we still have this dilemma of whether it is particle or it is particle or wave. So science didn't mature the way he thought. This is number one. Number two, he thought of science as the only driving force of the society toward the prosperity, which again is not the case. We have economy, we have politics, we have ethics, and all these things are very dominant, very important in terms of their role in the society. And on top of that, which is against positivism, economy, politics, and ethics, by definition, of course, rely a lot on the spiritual and ethical, metaphysical values. So even if you eliminate, even if you cannot simply think of science as once it is there, and even if it is matured enough, it's not going to give you what you need. You need other things besides science too. And the other thing with positivism, it talks about observation and experimentation. Where is the mission? Where is the purpose of life? How do we answer the question, why do we live? And what is the vision of the society and the individuals? All these questions are ignored or left out by positivism. It seems Comte just focused on a narrow circle of his investigation, focused on a very narrow circle. And then after Comte, Darwin came. And he came up with the idea of evolution. He was on an island, you know the story. He was on an island and he noticed or observed some anatomical similarities between the birds on this island, like these finches you see here. And I'm not sure why Darwin thought this way, because when I see cars running in the street, I don't think they evolved from each other. I just think that different makers have done them or made them with different design and purpose. But anyway, he thought this way. And to give you some intuition about the way he thought, he looked at the limbs of some of the species. Not all of them are finches, as you can see. This is turtle, human, horse. And you can see some of these anatomical scenarios. And he explained that these things must have evolved from each other. And then after Darwin, Neo-Darwinism came, and they proposed two mechanisms for evolution. Mutation, which is genetic disruption. And I want to draw your attention, the only form of mutation we know is cancer, which has never been useful. But anyway, this is the mechanism they proposed. And then after Darwin, Spencer came and he put the notion of the survival of the fittest. And he applied that notion to the society, and he said we should not help the weak or the poor people, we should let them die. Because when they die, the society will be better. So this is evolution. And the important thing I want to draw to your attention here, the phenomena under question, the phenomena we study, has never been observed. Evolution has never been observed. So where is observation? Where is the scientific theory of Comte? It is not there. So Lamarck, he was one of the evolutionists, and he was a bit before Darwin. He noticed that, or he attributed the long neck of the giraffe to the fact that it was not reaching this tall tree. So upon stretching its neck over many generations based on mutation, then something happened, and then it managed to, the neck of the giraffe became so long. Was that observed? No. Actually, I quoted a statement from this biology book. You can see it here. And this statement is saying that Lamarck reasoned. Notice the word reasoned. He didn't say observed, because this is the correct term. Lamarck reasoned that the long muscular neck of the living giraffe had evolved over many generations. Like this many generations, how old? They said billions of people, no problem, because the earth already existed for a long time. So with that, they give themselves a long period where they can imagine anything to happen. You can imagine that the neck of the giraffe became long. You can imagine that some of the fishes became mammals. Anything can be imagined. So for me, I think of evolution as a combination of irrelevant observation. Why I say irrelevant? Because they can be interpreted in so many different ways, actually, plus some wild imagination supported by that concept that this mutation or the evolution happened over billions of years. But what relates to our discussion here is the fact, of course, religion is based on the main concept of creation. If creation is replaced by evolution, then the whole tenets of religion collapsed. And this is basically perhaps what Darwin wanted to say, but in a different way. So Darwinism gave a scientific framework for atheism, because now you can look at what is around you as the outcome of evolution, not the creation of God. Then Marx came and he proposed materialism. And as the word suggests, materialism put a lot of emphasis, almost 99% of emphasis on matter, not on human thought as idealism does. Idealism, which is the outcome, which is proposed by Hegel, they said the human thought comes first. This is the driving force. Marx said no. What drives the economy, what drives history is the material factor. These material factors are the driving force behind things. And then materialism proposed dialectic, which is a process, endless process. This process is meant to describe a constant struggle, contradiction between embedded contradiction within a system. So, for example, math has differentiation and integration. These are two contradictions. Economy had the struggle between the workers and the business owner. So this is constant struggle. And Mao, who is Marxism or Marxist, Mao has a book called On Contradiction. This is the name of the book, On Contradictions by Mao, M-A-O. And in this book, he described the complementary contradictions in many systems around us. So when you look at Marxism, you can see that human thoughts has no place. It is not the starting point. He said what drives history is material factors. Also, the personal attitude doesn't play much role in Marxism or materialism, because Marx said it is not the leaders that create history. It is the situation and the pressure that create leaders. So it is not because they have something extra that make them qualified to be leader. It is just that's how the burning factor shaped them. And of course, the ethical norms are also excluded because we are only driven by material factor and tangible pressure. That's all. The noble qualities are the same. They have no place because what drives us is the material factors. So you can see where Marxism is heading to. I don't need to say it. And then after that, Russell, who is considered to be the most influential philosopher of the 20th century, he did a lot of work on different areas. One of them is the logic of language. And one of his contributions toward the logic of language is the theory of definite descriptions. This theory, by the way, is not very easy. Even some philosophers have critique against it. They said Russell tried to describe something very simple in a very complex way. But anyway, apart from that criticism, the idea behind this theory is as follows. He said that the way we use ordinary language leads to a lot of ambiguity and unsubstantiated references. What does it mean, unsubstantiated references? He said we use terms that do not have cognitive existence. Like, for example, when we talk about wisdom, what is wisdom? What is it exactly? If you describe it in terms of behavior, in specific cases, okay. But you want to describe it as qualities, then it is cognitively empty, according to him. So what is he heading to? What he tried to say is, if we want our statement to be scientific, we have to put them in forms similar to the mathematical arguments. And this is based on his belief that mathematics can be reduced to logical forms. Then the conclusion from this theory is our descriptions must be concrete, type of concrete, okay, no problem. But notice this dangerous word, they must be empirically defined entities. They must be testable some way. Empirically mean experimentally. So whatever we use, it has to be subject to be tested and proved or discredited. Then Vienna Circle came. What is Vienna Circle? Vienna Circle is a group of philosophers and scientists, and they used to meet in Vienna for some years in 1924 to 1936. Then after the Second World War, some of them moved to US as professors of philosophy. And they have two types of people. They have members, those who used to attend the meetings regularly, and they have sympathetic, those who used to attend the meeting occasionally, like Russell. By the way, Russell used to attend their meeting every now and then. And this circle took upon themselves that they have to remove metaphysics completely from science. In other words, they took the mission of secularizing science. And yes, this circle actually was very influential. And perhaps because of that, the way we learn science nowadays is based on the way they imagined science or visualize science to be. So again, they said scientific claims are only meaningful if and only if they are testable. So again, we are back to the observation. And they admitted or accepted two types of knowledge, only two, the prior analytic and the empirical and synthetic. This means that the synthetic a priori for Kant is dismissed. And also the circle rejected two important things. They rejected metaphysical arguments. Before we proceed, what is meant by metaphysical argument? Because sometimes when we hear this term, we think of paradise and hellfire. Actually, metaphysical arguments are more general than this. Metaphysical arguments refer to all abstract arguments. Like, for example, when you talk about space, time, beauty, wisdom, all these abstract arguments, they rejected. Why? Because they said it cannot be tested. And also they are not true based on form. Not true based on form is like, form means the way the statement is built lexically. It is like when you say triangle has three sides. This is true based on form. But they said the metaphysical argument, neither. They are not testable, they are not true based on form, so they should be out. And also they rejected the unconditional ethical standards. The unconditional ones. It's like when you say one has to be good to his parents and to his neighbors. They said this is very universal statement. It is not scientific. If you qualify it to specific cases, they can discuss with you. So these are the most important outcomes of the Vienna Circle. What is more important and concrete, the Vienna Circle proposed or came up with logical positivism. So it is two words, positivism, which came from Comte. Remember the one who said that the societies advance until religion is totally out and science is the only predominant factor in explaining things. And then why they put the word logical? Here they relied on what Russell proposed in the theory of definite description. He said whatever we use, it has to correspond to something with external existence, something that can be tested and verified. So this combination of the two, the positivism of Comte and the description by Russell, formed logical positivism. And of course, as you can see, now we can summarize the outcome of that. All metaphysical, spiritual, and ethical arguments are considered unscientific. Of course, when you say unscientific, that means you can equate it to legendary, you can, or basically all the negative connotation that come to one's mind when you talk about unscientific stuff. So now we gave, or we described the most important milestone of secularizing science. Now we want to recap. Before secularizations, science, if you think of this, of the core of science as the scientific corpus, it was also very tightly coupled with the metaphysical argument with God, and was talking about all that metaphysical stuff. And also it was connected to the spiritual and sentimental values. We can talk about beauty, we can talk about harmony. Actually, the book of Kepler is called On the Harmony. I'm not sure, I forgot the name, but it's called On the Harmony of the World or the Harmony of the Universe. You can review. And also, science used to be regarded as different layers. First, you know the basics, then you master more and more and more. So the deeper you go, the more insight you develop. Until in the end, you develop this wisdom. So that's how science used to be. Now, when secularism came, as you know, the Vienna Circle rejected the metaphysical argument. They said it has no place on science. They are cognitively empty. So let's remove them. Okay. And then they came to the spiritual and sentimental value. They said these are stuff it cannot be quantified. So let's just remove them. They are really not subject to experimentation because they are not numbers. So remove them. Okay, and then they came to the deeper aspect, the insight, the wisdom, are all the things. They said they are cognitively empty. They don't really represent anything. So let's remove them too. So actually, what remained from science are just mere measurements and lab experiments. Very sad, actually. We need an Islamic renaissance to restructure science and build it the way it should be. Thank you.